In the last section, we're going to look at some of the factors that affect fertility in northern beef herds in particular. Many of the factors that we've already covered do affect beef cattle, and we've already mentioned some of them. But a recent study has been undertaken that has specifically looked at reproductive performance in beef cows in northern Australia. It was called the CashCow project, and I just wanted to summarise some of the results from that project because they do reveal some interesting findings. This study was undertaken in 78,000 beef cows between the years of 2008 and 2011 by Mike McGowan and his group at the University of Queensland. Some of the main findings associated with this study was that there were differences in reproductive performance depending on which region in Queensland and the Northern Territory and in northern parts of Western Australia people were undertaking grazing operations. Body condition score at the time of pregnancy diagnosis did affect further reproductive performance. Cows that were particularly low in body condition score suffered from poor reproductive performance in the following year. Phosphorus deficiency was associated with poor reproductive performance, as you would expect. The time of the previous calving period, and we'll talk about that shortly in a minute, but if cows that calved outside of the normal wet season were associated with poor reproductive performance, again not surprisingly. Where seasonal pasture quality was low, in particular low protein and digestibility, that was tended to reduce reproductive performance. Seasonal environmental conditions, such that if there was prolonged periods of heat stress or a delay in rainfall following the season break, and that was associated again with lower reproductive performance. Mustering within 2 months of calving or undertaking incomplete musters also reduced reproductive performance. Cow hip height, cows that were higher or taller. Across breeds, the taller the cows, the lower the reproductive performance. First lactation cows often suffered had reduced reproductive performance, and as you remember, these are the cows that are trying to grow, and so particularly if they calve down in low body condition, they're more prone to lactational anestrus, and so they suffer from lower reproductive performance compared to older cows that perhaps have already mature. Cows that didn't calve in the previous lactation also were suffering from lower reproductive performance. The presence of infectious diseases such as vibriosis and pestivirus were associated with lower fertility. Also, wild dogs appeared to also have a negative effect on reproductive performance. So here I've just taken some points out of the project report just to summarise them for you. The term 4P4M refers to pregnancy rate within 4 months of calving, and it was just showing that cows that had lower body condition score at the time of pregnancy diagnosis, they had lower pregnancy rates within 4 months of calving. Phosphorus deficiency, we mentioned previous calving period, the pregnancy rate within 4 months of calving was lower in cows that calved in July to September compared to December to March. Obviously they're calving in a period where there's greater nutritional stress on the animals. Reductions in seasonal pasture quality were associated with fetal and calf losses. Seasonal environmental conditions, particularly prolonged hot periods, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next lecture. And also interesting, as I mentioned, that cows that were mustered within 2 months of calving or where musters were incomplete, this was associated with higher fetal calf loss rates. Cow hip height, interestingly, the larger cows had a lower pregnancy rate within 4 months of calving, and fetal loss rates were also higher, and the critical hip height there was heights greater than 140 centimetres compared to heights less than 125 centimetres. This is hip heights taken at the highest point of the sacrum associated with the hip. Just saying again, mentioning the lower pregnancy rates in first calf lactation cows compared to older and more mature cows. Cows that didn't lactate in the previous year also had higher fetal calf losses in the current year. We mentioned infectious diseases, and the presence of wild dogs was associated with some fetal loss. Specifically, some of the regions that were associated with lower reproductive performance, the most sort of northerly regions here, this group called the northern forest regions. These had significantly lower reproductive performance compared to the other areas of the northern beef cattle industry. You can see here the northern forest areas, the pregnancy rate within 4 months of calving was quite a bit lower in this northern forest region compared to the other regions. The same with the annual pregnancy rate was lower, and the fetal calf losses were also quite a lot lower. That's the loss of calves between pregnancy diagnosis and mustering following calving. This is the annual pregnancy rate based on body condition score, and you can see animals in the lower body condition score categories compared to the higher categories had lower reproductive performance. Not surprising. So in response to this session, what you should try and do is get a piece of paper and just list as many factors as you can that were identified in this study that were found to significantly affect reproductive performance in beef cows in Northern Australia. Hopefully on your list you'll come up with a number of these factors.